Hello everyone, welcome to another video of Road to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You can't talk about the Final Fantasy franchise without mentioning the summons, a diverse set of entities that most of the time can help you cast a very powerful spell. But there's another important aspect that differs from each game. It's the relevance in the actual plot and world building of them. Back then, as a countdown to Final Fantasy XVI, I went through this topic game by game, and when it was Final Fantasy VII time, it was one of the few where the summons work purely as a game mechanic. They are just the red materia you obtain through the game in different parts of the world to cast different spells. They work more like collectibles, despite their godly treatment in other games. But with the addition and releases of Final Fantasy VII Remake and very soon Rebirth, summons have the chance to have added lore to them that didn't have back then. And today I want to talk about both what's been described already and the possibilities that there are for the future too. What we can say about the summons as a whole in Final Fantasy VII Remake, before going case by case, is that the most obvious idea would be linking them in one way or another to the time where the Cetra lived, the ancient race that could communicate with the planet itself. In the lore of Final Fantasy VII, these creatures are the embodiment of ancient knowledge condensed in materia. They are not exactly wandering free in present-time Midgar. During the game, in probably the prettiest moment at the Shinra VR exhibition, they talk about the Cetra and their link to magic, and of course, we are able to see the summons being included here, which hints at the possibility of their bigger involvement in the world building, which I would like to see, especially after playing all the other Final Fantasies and seeing how strongly involved they are there. There's one key detail. So far, the summons encountered were already condensed in their materia state, or we fought a virtual representation of them to get such, which means that we haven't seen or been able to interact with any of them in the actual world in their natural state. We only have replicas and condensed knowledge of them, so the chance to actually meet the real thing in dungeons around the expansive world of FF7 Rebirth is one idea I was always excited to see. Keep in mind, this is more theory and speculative talks than an accurate description of the lore of FF7. It's a combination of what's new and what could be new in the future, with some wishful thinking here and there. But let's check each summon individually. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first summon we are introduced to is Ifrit, the main fire elemental one, after Jesse gives us his summon materia in chapter 4, so there's no fight against him, and no battle intel until he joins a fight alongside Bahamut later in the game. On it, its description says, "This entity is said to have given humans the gift of fire, and is widely known as the incarnation of creation and destruction." This addition might be a little bit random, as in the original game, as we said, we have close to zero background about the summons, and Ifrit in particular was found at the cargo ship after the first Genova fight, without any correlation between them. But the story about having the fire and gifting it to the humans is the story of Prometheus from the Greek mythology. He's the one who stole the fire from Mount Olympus to give to humans, and as punishment, Prometheus was chained to a rock and cursed to have an eagle devour his liver for eternity, as things are normally handled in Greek mythology. Now, the idea of stealing or taking the fire for the benefit of humanity is a theme that recurs in different world mythologies and fiction. Maybe the most interesting part for us is that it may be a hint to his Final Fantasy XV version, where he, as a god, granted mankind his flame for civilization to flourish. What we can take from this concept, along the idea of summons being from the ancients' time, is that he either could have a symbiotic relationship with the Cetra to grant them the power of fire, who in response could use it as part of the planet's flow and energy, and eventually the human that survived the calamity from the sky that made the Cetra extinct make use of it, or that it means that Ifrit gave the surviving humans his gift so they could move forward in the ancients' absence. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but usually the term humans or humanity is used to describe the non-Cetra population, and not a combination of both. Also, as a side note, I think it's cute that they based their design on the original Ifrit. Since Final Fantasy VIII, Ifrit stopped looking demonic and like a djinn, as it did originally, to start being more of a feral beast instead. The lightning elemental RAMUH wasn't in Final Fantasy VII Remake, funny enough, but he finally made it during the Yuffie DLC Intermission, as the Summon VR boss fight. His description states, the fabled Lord of Leven recreated. He is said to have cast judgment on the wicked with mighty bolts of lightning, and exhorted humanity to accept the ways of law and order. Lord of Leven is a common Final Fantasy XIV way to call RAMUH, and Judgment Bolt has always been his ultimate attack, so this description looks like flavor text for his base attack, with some godly-like detail added to it, like how it led humanity to the creation of laws, the type of background and origins you would read from gods in different myths in the real world. Therefore, similar to Ifrit's description just mentioned. So while nothing screams Final Fantasy VII world, now it's 2 summons in a row that have descriptions that resemble some sort of real-life influence and are very myth-like, treating them as god-like entities and not just as simple collectibles. In terms of a potential role in the story, well, there's one very common role that is assignated to RAMUH in other games, and that is the wise old man that guides the struggling character, more commonly the one connected with the summons themselves, like how it happens with Terra and her Esper heritage in Final Fantasy VI, or Dagger and her Eidolon heritage in Final Fantasy IX. So while the idea of a RAMUH helping the Cetra Aerith in time of need sounds like something that could be fitting, more explicitly at the Temple of the Ancients filling the role of that spirit that roams inside, with his introduction in Intergrade and those more generic descriptions, probably it won't happen and remain as a myth, an old tale. Although that would be nice. The next one in the list is pretty interesting, and the main inspiration to do a recollection like this. The ice element Shiva has a pretty interesting description in her remake Enemy Intel. It is the manifestation of a queen who once healed the planet's wound with ice, as evidenced by the existence of permafrost in the polar lands. This is the description that, while it speaks about old tales from the past, it actually matches and links to Final Fantasy VII specific lore, as the calamity from the skies, Genova, fell into the northern continent, creating its crater, which froze over and a glacier formed around it over time. And were responsible for the extinction of almost a full ancient race, it could be sealed by the Cetra themselves in its original landing site for the last 2000 years. Not to mention, this continent we are allowed to explore is indeed a snowy and ice-filled place. So what this description tells us is that Shiva was part of such group that sealed Genova, and the snowy fields and glacier formed around are signs and consequences of her actions during it, which I find fascinating, utilizing a summon to explain the background of one of the main places in the planet, and one of the main events from the past that expands the setting and world building as a whole. So my expectations for Rebirth is to be able to at the very least have a nod to that, by being able to actually see some of these once we reach the northern crater maybe. Like how I said before that I like to see the summons not in their VR representation, but in their habitat in some corner of the world. I am aware that the northern continent would be the last place to visit, and Shiva one of the first summons to interact with, as that was the case in the original game, besides the Chocobo one. That's why I mostly expect to see nods to that in other ways instead, like more lore drops about this event in any way, from a random NPC in Con to a main cutscene in the Cactuar Iceland, I don't know, I take anything. There's one interesting detail in the original game, and it's the secret mini-boss that you can find in this field called the Great Glacier. And hidden in one of the caves, there's this mysterious NPC, that if you collect hot spring water, you'll be able to trigger a fight against Snow. This ice fairy, that could easily pass as a Shiva underling, seems like a lesser version of her, and multiple smaller ice fairies related to Shiva are somehow common in Final Fantasy. So maybe we could see something that links both the remake description and this mini boss fight to expand on the idea. The reward for this fight is the Alexander summon, funny enough, and that's one of the new ones for Rebirth, but we'll talk about it in a bit. In the meantime, the most iconic summon of the series, Bahamut, couldn't be absent, and it's even one of the many extra bosses of the game in some way. Its enemy intel description says, it is the manifestation of a Dragon King revered by the original stewards of the planet. According to oral tradition, there are many Bahamuts, each with their own powers and forms. Two very straightforward and interesting sentences. First of all, the term Dragon King or King of Dragons is a very legacy-like way to describe him, as it has been the case since Final Fantasy I, so it keeps that tradition. The interesting bit for us about the Final Fantasy VII specific part is that the stewards of the planet, another way to call the Cetra, hold Bahamut in high regards, so maybe it was even an actual deity for them, which in some way explains his appearance during the VR exhibition, and that the other summons that appear along it can also be linked with the Ancients, which is the assumption. Or even, maybe the way that Bahamut during its boss fight is able to summon Ifrit itself is a subtle way to say he is a deity above the rest, who knows. The other sentence I find very cute, because I'm pretty sure this is a direct callback to the different Bahamuts that exist in Final Fantasy VII, this being Neo Bahamut, found originally at the first visit of the Northern Crater, a red dragon with a very impressive animation that I'm sure they were very proud, and Bahamut Zero, available at the end of the huge materia segment of the game that will shoot you from space. If this description sways me to predict something, it would be the confirmation that these or other variations of Bahamut will appear, and it's a matter of time only. In fact, now that I say that out loud, if I have to guess which summon would be the closest one to a super boss, I'd go with Neo Bahamut, and if by the time part 3 arrives, I can have something similar to the Final Fantasy XIII 2 final boss, with 3 Bahamuts attempting to nuke me at the same time, that'd be fun. I said that the original Final Fantasy VII has almost non-existent lore in relation to summons. The reason I said almost is because the giant sea serpent Leviathan is considered a deity by the people from the mighty nation of Wutai, where our beloved Yuffie is from, and the description found in the remake enemy intel confirms this background as it says. This entity is a tutelary dragon deity said to protect people from natural disasters. Today, most of its worshippers live in the vicinity of Wutai. So yes, in case someone wondered, the Wutai connection still stays. In the original game we can read lines like, "How dare you, the Chao statue and Leviathan are ashamed," or referring to its legend as a water god snake. Find key items like the Leviathan scales, which is able to put down the strongest flames at the Dachao statue mountain. And to obtain the summon materia itself, it's only by having Yuffie and completing her side quest at Wutai, which in a way shows that connection. What I find interesting is that in this small segment I referenced at the VR exhibition, the summons that appear are Ifrit, Shiva and Bahamut, while Leviathan, the other one that exists in the game besides the Chocobos, wasn't. I don't think this information by itself means much, as its loading screen description says that this giant serpentine entity is said to have quelled great many calamities. But maybe it's their way to push Leviathan as the Wutai icon, and not mix it too much with the Cetra imagery along the rest. My prediction for Rebirth, knowing that Wutai as a location won't be fleshed out until part 3, is mostly about Yuffie herself, the Wutai character, to be linked with Leviathan in some way or another over the rest. As far as I know, this summon is an exclusive for having a remake save file, so I don't know the implications of that and its natural appearance through the game or the world. Therefore, I will be content if there's a focus on the link between it and Yuffie in particular, at least until part 3, where we'll visit Wutai, and if I have to predict something now, I'd like to see Ashura as a summon too, but that's topic for the future. Now, let's get more by talking about the new summons confirmed for Rebirth. It's not surprising that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth added and revealed more summons to the game, as there are still quite a handful of those that the original had and are yet to appear. In fact, at this point in the original, there were no summons at all, so if anything, we are going at a faster pace, and that's nice. It's also the reason we can go willy-nilly predicting stuff in chronological order, as that ship sailed already. At the time of making this video, these 3 summons have been the confirmed ones. KUJATA is an interesting one in the Final Fantasy franchise, because its real-life inspiration is at the same level that are the Behemoths, Leviathans and Bahamuts, but it's way less prevalent in the series, so having a time to shine is exciting. So far it looks awesome, and luckily with less eyes and heads than the one from its mythology. So far it has been described as a bovine deity that charges around the battlefield wielding the power of fire, ice and lightning. That is true. In the original game, the gimmick was that its attack, the Tetra Disaster, combined the most common elements in the game in a way it's rarely done with other spells. If you are wondering why a Tetra attack has 3 elements, I can't fully explain it, but on its animation it has a final earth-shattering attack, so that's where the 4th element comes to have that name. Its design is amazing, as it has the 3 heads to represent the different elements, and it looks so impressive and massive it is almost like having the beast version of Ganon as an ally when summoning it. As we said, we can't guide us by the location or appearance in the original game, as you can find it at the exit of the Sleeping Forest there. And if we follow that, it means obtaining it previous to what is mentioned as the final location of the game. The pictures shown here are the ones shared, and while of course doesn't mean much, the location used to capture these shots is the canyon surrounding the town of Cosmo Canyon, or simply the Cosmo area. We can interpret that as it would be obtainable before reaching the place at any other point. Or maybe that the place near is where this beast resides, as again, I would love to be the case that summons are found in natural places around the world, maybe through Chadley towers and such. Also, there's probably going to be more flavor text about its role in the world building like the others. The descriptions around so far are very adamant to call the summons the power of the gods and deities after all. The holy elemental summon of the game is Alexander. We mentioned before how you get Alexander through a mini-boss at the Great Glacier, and now we know that logically that's not going to be the case, but rather way earlier. It may come as a surprise after talking about many fantastic beasts, that we have here a large, towering robot that resembles a gigantic mechanical castle, but it's extremely cool. Now, Final Fan TV has shared their theory about Alexander's role and involvement into the plot and lore. Basically, Alexander's link to the Cetra is such that could be even a sentient version of the forgotten capital itself, or a similar one. But for further details I will link his video in the description so you can check it out fully. And I have to say that already the premise of that sounds fantastic to me. It's the type of theories I'm into, and I kinda want that to be the case. The Holy element was a very unique feature that it has in the original game. Usually, Holy is the biggest spell for white mages on the offensive side, but is not present in Final Fantasy VII. Instead, we have the Holy Materia that Aerith activates at the end of Disc 1, and is triggered only after defeating the final boss. So the summon is the only way to cast a spell or have an attribute with this element, so there's a connection there that could be used. If it's not with Aerith, well, it's going to be with the Cetra as a whole. After all, Aerith obtained her materia thanks to her real mother. I can't help but love the fact that the same group that includes godlike entities such as the King of Dragons, a demon-like Fire Lord, and a giant sea serpent, has also one that is a sentient castle. I think there's a charm in there that I am fascinated by, especially when you get deep into different games in the franchise and see that two of the most badass scenes ever involve Alexander on it. Never mentioned Bahamut what happened in Final Fantasy IX. And the last summon shown so far, although I'm sure not the last one to appear, is our beloved Odin, and its Sansetsuken insta-death attack. Well, probably it's not going to be insta-death, but surely strong enough to feel like it. He gallops riding Gungnir towards its foes and sends them flying with a single sweeping slash, usually insta-killing low-level enemies, but in the original FF7, when that wasn't the case, fortunately the spell won't go to waste, as he instead would throw his Spear of Gungnir unnecessarily way high to land 2 meters in front of him, for damage. And I kinda want to see that attack also to be in the game, maybe not as the ultimate attack, but as an ATV one. It's hard to predict which role in the lore and background Odin could have, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's associated with some involvement and spiritual belief about death in the Cetra circles. Something like the Reaper or Charon the Ferryman in Greek mythology underworld, but leading the souls of the Cetra to the livestream instead, given that while it's a non-elemental summon, its added effect is indeed the death status. My personal wish is that while the location of the summons clearly don't match the original, in some way I'd like Odin to remain the same, because as his name implies, its inspiration is the Norse mythology, and where you find it, the Shinra Manor of Nibelheim also has quite the Norse inspiration, and I think it's fitting. Granted, Vincent is no longer optional, but the puzzle and boss fight could be to obtain only Odin, or something else. In the little footage we have so far, I think it's giving the final blow to the Midgardsorn, which again I wouldn't mind, that sounds like a canon event to me, although that sounds very early in the game to be the case. Odin is one of the main and original Final Fantasy summons that had yet to appear in the Final Fantasy VII Remake world, and the other one that is missing is one that we could make our prediction to be in this game. I am referring to the Earth Elemental Titan. In the original game, you'll be able to find Titan after RAMUH. Does that mean that it's going to appear in Rebirth, as RAMUH already did? Probably not, but I have to say I'm quite curious about this summon in particular, because its main feature is that it's supposedly way bigger than the usual summons which are already quite tall. and so far in every modern Final Fantasy game they have not held back with Titan size. In 13, you could see him there in the background, having giant tortoises for lunch. In 15, he would punch those now bigger tortoises in the mouth as he holds you in the palm of his hand. And in 16, his Titan Lost variation made me lose all sense of space. So in a game like FF7, where summons are made to fight along your side, you either create Titan to be smaller, which sounds contradictory, or not at all, so I'm not sure about that. What I will predict is the following. According to some words from Hamaguchi, there will be a surprise in regards of a summon that wasn't from the original Final Fantasy VII. And this is totally not me having a wishful thinking idea, but from my prediction that this footage means a possible Gilgamesh boss fight, I'm starting to think and convince myself that its reward to beating him is going to be similarly to what happens in Remake, obtaining him as a summon materia to use in battle. That's my out-of-the-box prediction. If not, a summon I would like to see here that wasn't in the original game, probably following Final Fantasy XVI, Fenrir would be a good one, especially if there's a hidden Titan like in Final Fantasy IX for the ultimate attack and we can solve the Earth elemental problem. If not, maybe Atomos? So what do you think? Are we going to see Titan in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Are we going to see a new one? Do you have maybe a crazy and slightly biased prediction like me and Gilgamesh? Please let me know as we celebrate this new info and countdown to this lovely game. Thank you very much for watching, enjoy some Final Fantasy, and I'll see you later. Love you.